It's a very important race in a very important community on March 14th. I'm going to begin by starting with you, Rob Long, as the challenger, and ask you, Rob, distill for us as best you can and tell us, what the important distinctions are between you and Juli Casale that voters should keep in mind when they vote in this race.
Absolutely. And thanks to you guys, Steve, Daniel, Pat, for having us here today. I appreciate the chance to interview with the Sentinel editorial board. So I've been campaigning it's been several months now. Had a lot of conversations with folks all over the city, whether it's from door knocking, from forums and screenings like this, from sitting with coffee with folks. I've noticed a common theme. People want to be heard. They really want to feel like they have a commissioner they can partner with and that they can trust. This city is starving for healthy relationships. People are over all the drama and the controversy, whether it be lawsuits, whether it be city manager and staff turnover, whether it be fines from our Department of Health. People want someone that they can trust. What I bring to the table is experience, bring history of working with a lot of different organizations in my history serving on the Soil and Water Conservation District to serve my constituents. I bring transparency and I bring ethical leadership. And I do believe that's something that we are missing on the commission right now.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead.
Let me follow up on that real briefly.
Sure.
And the litany of problems you've just delineated, how much of that is Juli Casale's responsibility?
I believe some of our current lawsuits are a direct cause of decisions that my opponent made, Old School Square being one of them. It also creates a major tax burden to residents in Delray Beach. Now, we had something that was 80% funded by donors that is now going to have to be funded by the city. And I think that, could be anywhere from about around 3 million are the figures that I've heard. And that's not including the 1.5 million construction costs that had been funded by one donor, and then the lease was terminated and that donor pulled out. Now the city has to do that construction at a higher cost.
Okay, we'll come back to these issues for sure, but let me turn to Juli Casale and ask you the same question I asked Rob Long, Juli, and please distill as best you can the distinctions between you and Rob Long and why voters should re-elect you.
Thank you. I'm sorry I got knocked off there briefly. It said I didn't have a network connection, so I apologize. Well, super quick. I ran for commission because I spent 2 years opposing a 102-unit apartment complex, which was to be built directly outside of my single-family neighborhood. Prior to that, I had no experience with local politics. I'm embarrassed to say I was not remotely involved. I joke that I stumbled and fell into politics because that's truly what happened. I started going to the meetings to see what was effective. How do you oppose this? I worked with the developer, the property owner, and the land use attorney for 2 whole years to get the project that worked for my neighborhood. And it was a fabulous, we came together. It was a fabulous experience of 2 years. And we have single family homes on this parcel now. I just saw the land use attorney the other day and he hugged me saying, I've never had opposition that was so pleasant. I believe there's always a way that you can compromise and get something that works for everybody. And that has been how I functioned as a city commissioner. I was elected on the eve of COVID. We had just learned that there were water problems. We had turnover of city managers prior to me coming, and we have unprecedented uncertainty. Are our kids going to have food because they're not in school? Are people going to be able to afford their homes, their rent, their electricity? What will happen to our local businesses? This is what I stepped into, and I have accomplished a great deal in the 3 years that I served, and I am very proud. I think what distinguishes me from my opponent is strictly our votes on development, and that is a really big issue here in Delray. Residents want to remain the village by the sea and retain our charm. And he votes for a lot of very large developments that people come out in opposition to. And I typically don't. I'm not opposed to development. Development by its definition is improvement. But whenever anyone is coming in front of us, they're coming to go outside of what is permitted. And we recently implemented a comprehensive plan and are amending our LDRs to fit that plan. So if someone is coming to us, they're coming to us because they're not doing something that is already within our rules. Thank you.
May I respond to that briefly? Sorry, Steve, I can't hear you.
Yes, Rob, you'll have a chance to respond, but I want to ask Julie Casale one brief follow-up question.
Sure.
This would be a good time, Julie, to tell us specific projects that you opposed that Rob Long supported that are not in the city's best interests.
Okay, I would say Aura Delray, 292 apartments on the corner of Congress and Atlantic Avenue. There's a number of issues with that. I'm a proponent of preserving our commercial tax base. Right now in the city of Delray Beach, our commercial land use is 9%. That property was a commercial property, should be utilized for commercial. And more important, it's a mixed industrial commercial, MIC designation. 2% of our land use in our city is industrial. Industrial is a necessary part of your city to retain the quality of life that you need, because that property can hold only certain types of businesses. My concern in that case is, one, our comp plan suggests that we protect and preserve our commercial tax base to eliminate the burden on the residential homeowner. Two, that property, besides the fact that it was converting a zoning from MIC to SAD, Special Activities District, which made it all residential, there's absolutely no way. The traffic problems we have around here are horrible. You have to come out of that development and cross over 4 lanes to get to the left turn lane on Congress to get on 95. Or you have to go out of the development and U-turn in 2 different locations. So it's a problem. That's one example. I have dozens.
Okay, I'm going to pause there. Rob, you have the floor. I want you to respond to the statements that she's just made about Aura.
Absolutely. I believe Aura was a 5-1 vote from the Planning and Zoning Board, for one. And Aura actually had a lot of affordable housing included with it as well, which is something that we need in Delray. And my opponent has voted against more affordable housing in Delray Beach than anyone else on the dais right now. I think that's important to note. And I also think there's an important distinction that should be made between recommending zoning approvals to the commission and actually approving an entire project from the commission. There's been a lot of graphics and things going out from my opponent's campaign that compare our 2 voting records, but it's apples to oranges, because we don't even see entire projects when they come before the Planning and Zoning Board. And it's a quasi-judicial item. We're not allowed to vote based on community input and a litany of other things. We don't even have other boards, like the Site Plan Review Board, haven't even seen these projects yet. We don't even have the benefit of their input. And we're in fact told by the attorney that we have to strictly vote based on whether it fits within the LDRs in the comp plan. And this project did. This project did. And I've only ever voted within the constraints of the comp plan and our LDRs. And because if I just said, yeah, I prefer this project to be an industrial project instead, so I'm going to vote no. That's how we end up with an appeal from that, and we end up in litigation from that applicant. So I've always done my job on planning and zoning. I've always been transparent about it. I've always been transparent about any potential conflicts. I've always communicated with our attorney, about anything that could cause a lawsuit from an applicant. And so I'm proud of the way that I voted on planning and zoning. I voted in a way that protects the city from litigation and that is fair to, and that follows the guidelines that we are given for quasi-judicial hearings that come in front of the Planning and Zoning Board. But it's not the same as voting on an entire project with a whole spectrum of information in a specific site plan and community input. It's a completely different thing. So it's really not, it's a bit disingenuous on my opponent's part to compare the 2. Thank
okay.
you.
If I may.
Yeah, briefly, go ahead. Yep.
Thank you. Super. Thank you. One, it's totally untrue to say that we open ourselves up to litigation when we deny an applicant what they are not entitled to. They are coming to us for something they are not entitled to and requesting it. We can deny it on any basis. Listen, the denials should be based on something tangible, like policy ECP 641, which tells us to protect our commercial and industrial use, to maintain and enhance our job base. But everybody doesn't study the policies before they go to the meetings, so they may not have the specific benefit of an exact policy. But we can deny for any reason, and that does not open us to litigation. Anyone can sue you, but they're not entitled to something. So that's not accurate. To say that my opponent always goes within the LDRs and the comp plan is not accurate either, because people, again, are coming to us for that reason. The SWAN is another example. The city shall not abandon alleys. That is our policy NDC 2.2.2. He's voted to do that. So he's not always voting within the policies, and nobody is, because that's what people are coming to us for.
Okay. Let's
Thank
pause
you.
there.
Oh, and can I, if you don't mind, Steve, to talk about, because my opponent said I'm not a proponent of workforce housing. I'm actually working on, I've requested a consensus to work on having the CRA purchase 10 acres to provide affordable homes for seniors, apartments for seniors, the largest demographic becoming homeless, families and workforce. But the aura, with a 292 unit, providing 72 workforce units in the 80 to 120% median income. They're not affordable. They're not even probably workforce. And the problem I had with that particular project, because I did some research on the developer, they have an a la carte menu. So yes, they would keep the rent within a certain range, but then when the tenant gets in, there's all these extra fees: parking lot fees, garbage fees, bug spray fees. If you have a dog, there's a fee. And what happens is that's not affordable.
Okay.
So it's really an illusion.
All right. I hear the point.
Thank you.
I'm going to pause and open the floor to my colleagues, either Dan Sweeney or Pat Beal, for questions.
May I just very briefly respond to like a couple things there? I promise I'll keep it brief. I don't want to get into a back and forth.
Go ahead. 1 minute.
One, you can't just not approve a project for no reason. That is exactly how we get into litigation, and that's how projects get appealed, right? That happened with Delray Central. In fact, it's happened with many projects that get appealed because the applicant appeals it because they don't feel like they got due process. If they can make the argument they didn't get due process, the city does open itself up to litigation. And approving a conditional use does not mean you're going outside of the comp plan. But in regards to the affordable housing my opponent's talking about, I believe she's talking about the old Plamosa site, which belongs to the school district. And the school district, I have on good authority, is not selling that land. My opponent knows that. She forced a consensus during a CRA meeting to start conversations. This was the same project that Commissioner Boylston brought up several times, and my opponent voted against moving forward on, when the land was appraised for much less and the district was actually willing to sell it. My opponent's been doing a victory lap on this consensus now for months, and it's meaningless because they're not selling it. And she's used this as one of her accomplishments in multiple forums and speeches. And it's a non-starter. I've spoken with the chief of staff at the school district. They have no intention of selling this land. So any plans that my opponent is talking about, if it's in regard to this property, are not happening. Maybe there's other property I don't know about, but if it's in regards to the old Plamosa site that belongs to the school district, and they're not selling it. Thank you.
All right.
And if I may.
Nope.
I
We're going to move on.
Okay,
I'm
fine. Move on.
going
Thank
to
you.
open the floor to questions for Pat or for Dan.
Thank you.
I did want to address the affordable housing issue because, Julie, you said in your response that, affordable housing and diverse housing go hand in hand. You talked about tiny homes, et cetera, but really affordable housing and density go hand in hand. And, if they're, and so when you were discussing, 10 acres set aside, for senior housing, essentially, I'm getting back to density and how you think you're going to be able to balance that with the village by the sea concept and also infrastructure issues, and specifically water infrastructure issues. And that includes quality of water.
Yeah, no, listen, I don't disagree that in order to provide this housing, density is required. I'm not opposed to density. I think the problem I have with it is when we're giving the density in the example of Aura and a number of these other units, we have the ability to say, we would like for you, the applicant, to provide us housing at the lower level, at the mid-low level, at the moderate level. We can get more for our residents, but we're not. What we're getting is the high moderate level, that 80 to 120%. And to be honest with you, Pat, the problem is Delray Beach has a very high number of low paying jobs. So what we need to provide for our residents, right? The people that are working in our downtown, it's restaurant and tourism industry and Publix. They need something that's at a lower rate, and we're not providing that. So, I agree with you that you need density in order to provide this. And by the way, that 10 acres, the CRA director, I have asked her, is that off the table? And she has not indicated such. So I don't believe that's the case, because she's the person in contact with the school board. But yes, on that 10 acres, you would be looking at density for apartments for seniors, multi-unit for families, and then some housing. Oh, and with respect to the water quality, I mean, I share everybody's concerns, and that's why we are working towards $130 to $160 million new water treatment plant. And we recently hired our owner's rep, selected our owner's rep. We're moving forward with that.
You're muted, Pat.
Rob? Yeah, Rob?
Sure. So in regards to the affordable housing, I agree. But right now, the law doesn't say that applicants have to provide the lowest category of affordable housing only. They have 3 different categories they can choose from. And so the reality is you can't deny a project because they chose to offer affordable housing at the mid or higher level. That's just the reality of it. Yeah, I do wish as well. And that would take changes with the laws right now to be able to do that. But we don't have that. And so you can't use that as an excuse, because again, the applicant is entitled to build, and they only have to offer affordable housing within those 3 categories. So it's not, that's how we end up again with litigation, with appeals, with lawsuits. In regards to water quality, I've always fought for clean water in Delray Beach. In fact, I won a national award from the National Association of Clean Water Agencies for my advocacy in Delray Beach on clean water. I think it's important to note that when I brought up concerning issues with PFAS contamination in Delray Beach, levels that were high, they were still slightly below the advisory limits at the time, but they were higher than a lot of other cities. And there was some argument as to whether other constituents should have been counted. I shared information from a nonprofit who's a watchdog agency for things like this. And I was attacked by my opponent and the mayor, where they tried to remove me from planning and zoning for sharing this information. That information was later found to be accurate because the Department of Health later that year started doing quarterly testing of our PFAS. And last year, the commission voted, and I praise the commission for this, they voted to join a PFAS class action lawsuit, which was great. And actually, as of now, the EPA has updated their standards, and we no longer reach them. Now, I agree that the new water treatment plant will have a lot of new technology like nanofiltration, for instance, to help address these concerns. But in the meantime, there is things residents can do that are cheap and affordable. You can get the equivalent of a Brita filter, that there's special ones that are about $200 that drastically reduce your exposure to high PFAS levels. So when I did share this, my opponent was more concerned with PR than she was for resident safety, I believe. And that was a big concern for me. And frankly, one of the reasons I decided to run. Thank you.
Okay. Rob, I want to ask you briefly, hang on a second. I want to ask Rob Long briefly about, Rob, your service on the Planning and Zoning Board and your work for Door-to-Door Strategies, which is a public engagement, citizen engagement, public advocacy group. If I'm not characterizing it accurately, please correct me. But what I want to ask is this. Not long after you joined the P&Z board in Delray Beach, you did vote, and you have voted at least 3 times. We've looked at the records. You voted for a project called Parks of Delray, the developer of which is a company called 13th Floor Investments. We know from looking at your website that you've done work for 13th Floor Investments. There's a testimonial on your website from a company executive named Dan Daly. It appears as though your work for 13th Floor Investments overlapped with your votes on the zoning board for 13th Floor Investments. So please explain.
Yeah, Dan Daly is also a state house representative. I don't believe he works for 13th Floor anymore. I met him in my background when I was president of the Young Democrats. I've known him for a long time. And we did a small amount of polling work for 13th floor on a project in Broward. And that work occurred after the vote on planning and zoning. So there was no conflict at the time of that vote.
Can you recall, or can you tell us when the work was for?
I would have to go back and look through my invoices, and I could give you the exact date. But I do know at the time of that vote, I had not worked with 13th floor. I can tell you that definitively.
Can you tell us what year you worked for 13th floor?
I'll have to go back and look. I don't have that on hand.
Okay.
But I can send that to you.
Do you think that your work for 13th floor, whenever it was, when you voted in 2018, 2020, and 2022 in favor of the Parks for Delray project, that might create the appearance of a conflict?
I could see how it would create the appearance of a conflict. However, I have never worked on any development projects within Delray Beach city limits. I'll tell you that definitively. So any work that I have done for anyone involved with land use or development has not been an impact in any of my votes in Delray Beach, including 13th floor. Like I said, what I worked on with them was, it was literally one neighborhood we did some polling in Broward County.
Okay, and the project, if I read the record correctly, the project we're discussing was in fact in the city of Tamarack. It was converting a golf course to residential development. Am I right?
That was something we worked with them on.
Okay. Do you know how long your work for them, how long a period of time it might have encompassed?
It was very short. It was like
I don't know what that means. Is that
it was like maybe a month or two. Again, it was literally one neighborhood where there was, I'm trying to remember it, frankly, because we've done a few different things like this, like tiny little golf course conversions have turned into like, there's a lot of those all over the county where there's just like, they can't afford to take care of the golf course anymore. And so they'll have us poll the community to see what the disposition is. And that's all we did. We collected data from the surrounding community in regards to a possible development of that golf course. And I frankly don't even know if it ever happened. I don't know if they went forward with it or not. We just were brought in to collect data from the surrounding community. That's what we did.
I'm gonna let Juli Casale respond to this dialogue we've had about 13th floor and about Dan Daly. Juli.
If I may go back to the PFAS briefly, if you don't mind.
Yes, go ahead.
Everybody takes PFAS seriously. That wasn't the issue. What happened was my opponent had written an op-ed, scathing op-ed. He didn't come to the commission. He didn't go to the city attorney. He didn't go to the utilities director. He wrote this op-ed. And he was sitting on the planning and zoning board, and he was also on the soil board at the time that he wrote it. And this is all in public meetings, so you can watch it. Mr. Hajimiri, our utilities director, the city attorney, and the interim city manager at the time, Ms. Alvarez, indicated that what he was saying was improper and not accurate. And so we had asked for him to, stop and apologize. I didn't ask for him to be thrown off the board at that time. And then what happened is he kept doing it. And so if the utilities director tells me what he's saying is inaccurate, then I believe that. So the problem was Mr. Long continued on that course, and he wrote out 2, I believe, op-eds following that. He says he wanted to work with the city on the problem, but he didn't. He just wrote these op-eds. What I did when I found out PFAS is I took a course on PFAS with the gentleman who runs our reclaimed water plant. I joined the League of Cities PFAS working group to stay informed and figure out where we were going. And I asked at the meeting recently about the litigation to get some money back for our taxpayers to help pay for this cleanup. So what I did is what an elected official should be doing, looking out for the residents and problem solving. What he did was utilize an issue that is a national issue. That's not a Delray Beach issue. And frankly, if Mr. Long were so concerned about PFAS, he should go out and look, because they're pulling up much higher numbers in wells all over the county that he was serving on his soil and water board. But he came only after Delray Beach and my mayor and myself. And then you find out he was paid by one of the candidates' PACs in the last election, $10,000. So I'm doing what an elected should do, which is trying to solve the problem and trying to help the residents. Thank you. With respect to 13th floor, frankly, I think you have a duty to disclose any conflict of interest. I read that that project went through the approval in approximately 2020. So at some point, Mr. Long voted on that project knowing he had done that work, and he didn't disclose it. And I will say that with respect to his work with Bonnie Miskell that's come to light of late, he never disclosed that publicly as a conflict of interest, and he voted on her applications 17 or so times. That's a problem for me.
Rob, I'm going to let you respond to this assertion about your association with Bonnie Miskell.
Absolutely.
She says 17 votes, not 4, 17.
Okay, that's news to me, but I don't know. I don't know how many votes it was, but as you know, I did disclose my conflict with Bonnie Miskell, my potential conflict. I was advised by our attorney that as long as the project has nothing to do with what I worked on her. Frankly, I've never actually worked for Bonnie Miskell, by the way. She's given me referrals, and what I was told was as long as I have never been given a referral of anything that has to do with what I'm voting on, then I'm in the clear. That's what the attorney told me when we spoke. And you saw the email exchange. Every time I can remember that an issue has come in front of me, I have disclosed it with the attorney, either through email, a phone call, or during the meeting itself. I've always been transparent about that. And as I've said, I've never been referred a client or done any work via Bonnie Miskell in Delray Beach, period. So there has never been a conflict. I've always been transparent about that. And by the way, from my understanding, Julie, can you please put on mute? I'm getting an echo. Thank you. It's my understanding that if I'm told by our city attorney that there is no conflict, that I'm obligated to vote. At no point was it ever made clear to me that I had an option to just simply recuse myself because I wanted to. I don't believe that that's in our ethics guidelines, that we have the ability to do that. And at no point during the attorney's recommendation to me was it conveyed to me that there is anything anything wrong with the advice he was giving me. I wasn't told at any point there needs to be some kind of secondary ethics opinion or anything like that, or I would have recused myself. None of that was made clear to me at the time. Frankly, it wasn't made clear until years later, but I would like to respond to some of the other things that my opponent just brought up very, very briefly.
Yes.
In regards to Mr. Hajimiri, I met with him before and after I released those op-eds. At no point did he say anything to me in the regard of any of that information being wrong or misleading. And I implore anyone here to read any of the op-eds that I put out in regards to that. In regards to Ms. Alvarez, I did talk to Ms. Alvarez about it, our interim city manager. I think it's important to note that Ms. Alvarez got her review from Ms. Casale afterwards, her exit review. Ms. Casale gave her unsatisfactory in almost every category and wrote a scathing review and alluded to the fact that it was because Ms. Alvarez wouldn't side with her political agenda to villainize me as spreading misinformation. And I encourage you to read that review.
All right.
I'll provide you that review. That's completely inaccurate. Yes, I did give her a scathing review, and I think 3 or 4 of us gave her a not so great review. She was not satisfactory. Employees were not happy. And I listed all of the reasons for, and when I do a review, I'm very thorough, had nothing to do with Mr. Long. But when he says that he spoke to Mr. Hajimiri, that's not what Mr. Hajimiri reported during the meeting. So I think, and secondly, when you say that you have to vote, it's your obligation. No, we've all taken the same ethics classes. And if there is ever any situation where you think there's a conflict, you should abstain from voting. And lastly, my understanding is Mr. Long did nothing but that one request on the 20th of Mr. Bennett. And how do I know this? I asked the city attorney to look and see if there were any other disclosures with respect to conflicts of interest. There were none at all. And it was 17, 2 in 2018, 5 in 20, 2 in 2021, and 7 in 2022, although one of those items got postponed. Thank you.
Okay, I've got a quick follow-up question on this for Rob Long. Rob, I am asking you to tell us who specifically, and whether it's in writing, who in the city attorney's office would have told you that if I heard you correctly, if the city attorney determines that it's not a legal conflict of interest, you must vote?
I don't have that in writing, but I'm happy to look into it.
But
I
did you
assume it was more ethics guidelines, or I was told that at a certain point. I was under the impression that it is my obligation to vote unless I'm told I have a conflict. And Mr. Bennett, our legal advisor, who we are told to ask exactly this type of information, told me I did not have a conflict. And I have spoken to the, I implore you to call Mr. Bennett and ask him. I have spoken to him multiple times to ask if I have a conflict with Ms. Miskell. And it's always been the same answer. As long as you don't have anything to do with the project before you tonight, you don't have a conflict. There's only probably one example of me actually emailing him. It doesn't mean I didn't call him other times or bring it up during meetings. I guarantee if you watch through meeting minutes, you would see it more than just that one time, because I know I've stated it on the record more than once. And by the way, maybe there were 17, but oftentimes it'll be one project with like 3 or 4 different components to it that show up as separate votes. And so I would have only disclosed that once in a given evening, and it may have been 4 or who knows how many votes. And if we're looking at Miskell, Dunlay, and Bachman, the firm that Ms. Miskell is from, there probably are a lot. It doesn't mean Ms. Miskell was even there or had anything to do with it. It could have been one of her partners that came in as well, who I have no relationship with.
Okay, we're going to move on. I want to switch subjects. Yeah, go ahead, Dan Sweeney. Go ahead.
Hey, yeah, I wanted to ask Juli Casale about a couple of her statements on her questionnaire. When we asked what's the most overlooked issue in the city, you stated fiscal stability and said our expenses are outpacing our revenues.
Right.
And not to create a scare, but we're heading for a pension bill.
Yeah.
So if Delray's expenses are outpacing revenues, the obvious follow-up question is what to do about it. What taxes and fees need to be increased? What services need to be cut back? How do you deal with the long-term fiscal stability of the city?
Thank you. That's a great question. And, we're seeing it every year. The expenses are growing. Interestingly, we got a lot of additional revenue this year from development, but then our expenses, it's a problem. So there's a number of issues. I had requested an audit of the payroll process at a meeting approximately 7 months ago after reading 2 comprehensive annual financial reports that indicated we had a problem. Our payroll process for time and attendance was being done mostly manually. So we noticed that we had some issues. And what we've done is we've converted to a time and attendance program. In other words, if you're not there, you're not going to get paid. It's simple. I also asked to implement a contract administration person in the city. What we discovered is we had these contracts where people are supposed to be paying us money, but we weren't always getting it. We didn't have an individual strictly in charge of contract administration. So now we do. So hopefully that will be a savings. I don't see that as remarkably substantial, although in 1 year we had about $625,000 that we were due that had been overlooked. Another thing we don't do is we're not getting assessment fees on some of these larger developments. So the commission has approved over 1,500 apartment units in the city in a short period of time. But the only assessments, the only impact fees we are getting right now are park fees. And I spoke to the planning and zoning department and the city attorney recently on this because we're way behind. We should be getting fees for police. We should be getting fees for fire. We should be getting impact fees. These developments tend to cost the residents. And that's one of my biggest issues with them. If they're costing the residents money, ultimately, and they're not really providing the workforce housing at the level that we need, they don't benefit our residents. So the problem, and this is to be very frank, the city said, the commission hasn't really had a taste for pushing these impact fees. Unfortunately, unless you have a big development like Parks of Delray, which kicks in the contingency and forces the developer to give us money, we're not really getting it. So that's another way.
It's not a situation where the impact fees can be waived and are just being waived as a matter of course.
They're not being asked for. So it's not that we have an option to get them and they're being waived. They're not. We don't even have a way of actually asking for them. Now, could the commission do it on their own? That was my question. Why aren't we just doing this verbally during a meeting? And the city attorney said, no, you really have to have something in place that says, you know, if there's so many units, so much of an impact fee. You kind of have to have a scale. But that's something we should have done years ago.
Is that
Because we've
something
done
that you will be doing if you're reelected? Is looking
I
at
would like
impact
to
these
do that,
projects?
yes. I mean, I'm one of 5, so, but I would like to do that, absolutely. It's necessary. It's past due. We've lost money. It's
As 1 out of 5, do you think there are other votes for that on the commission right now?
I would imagine there's at least 1, possibly 2.
Okay.
Yeah.
I wanna-
And then lastly, the pension. Sure.
Okay, I have a quick follow-up. Are you saying that the city is running in the red?
No, I'm not saying that we're running in the red. We've done very well with we have a lot of reserves. So we do well with that. And we try not to utilize the reserves. But I think that what's going to happen, Pat, is the amount of money we're getting in this year for additional revenues due to property tax, you know, development, we're at 96% build out. So I think eventually that plateaus while our cost of doing business keeps increasing. And we're not unusual. I looked at this because I was a little concerned. I think Boca's cost of doing business increased 9%. I think Boynton's went up 5, ours is 8, and I think the county was 11. So I'm not saying it's unusual, but I'm saying it's something that we have to be mindful of. And, you know, I'm always, my opponent says I'm anti-safety and I'm not friendly to the fire and police, but our pension system is a problem. One of our former mayors recently said we are going to have a pension crisis, and we are. So that concerns me. I'm about fiscal responsibility first and foremost.
What percentage of the pension is funded? I think y'all have fire, police, and then you
think it's I think we are, I did these numbers recently. I think we're like 61% unfunded liability. In 2015, it was about 40 million. In 2020, it was close to 60 for the fire and the same for the police.
Okay, thanks.
And then we implemented this drop program in the last contract. Are you all familiar with the drop program?
Yes.
So you understand what it means to go to 8 years for the fire department. Basically, people walk out the door with about $600,000 from the pension fund, and then they get their pension paid to them annually for life, the entirety of their life. And if they pass on,
What was
their
the
spouse gets it.
what was the eligible trigger of years before it was 8 years? What was it before?
5, and 8 was unprecedented. During the last vote, the issue of 8 came up. It was unprecedented. Nobody in the county had it. It was shocking to me, and it got voted in. I voted no.
Julie, I want to stay with you for a second. Please mute your microphone for a second, because that reverb is distracting. Thanks. The question is, we're going to stay on employee compensation. Now, this is not a huge amount of money, and I don't know that it's been a huge issue in this campaign yet. You and Rob Long would tell us, but this is a vote you cast, Julie, in August of 2020, which nearly tripled the salary of the city commissioners. It went from $9,000 a year to $24,000 a year. It's not a huge amount of money, and I know that news stories at the time said that Delray's salary for its elected officials was low compared to Boca and Boynton Beach, and that may be the case. But the optics of doing this during the pandemic, there was a employee freeze at City Hall. Tell us why this was the right vote. This was a 3-2 vote, and you voted in the majority. Why?
Thank you. I did. I had come in and this was already somewhat underway. So our rules require that if you're going to implement any kind of a possible pay raise, there's a way it had to be done. It had to be voted in 6 months prior to an election. So there's only certain years and certain times of year that you can actually do it. It hadn't been done in 14 years. The city did a study of all the surrounding areas, and we were well under. I think Boca City Commission was getting 32,000 and their mayor 40. Boynton Beach was ahead of us. Everybody was ahead of us. We were getting $9,000. And look, I love the job. I would do it for $9,000. I would do it for free. But we're responsible for a $280 million budget. It's a big job. So, and by the way, we also manage the CRA. We're on the CRA board, and we sit on the reclaimed water board. We use our own vehicles. There's a lot involved, but there hadn't been a raise since 2006. So it has to be voted in at this time, or it won't be considered and there's no raise. I did vote it in. On the day that after the election, when we were to accept it, I did say we don't need to accept it. We could forego it. We don't have to take the raise. Nobody else wanted to do that. We got the raise. But one thing you should know is we didn't lay anybody off in the city. We just didn't hire for positions we didn't have filled. Also, every single person in the city got their normal step up. When we evaluate our employees for annually, they can get up to 5% increase. And everybody got the increase that they were entitled based on their review. I mean, we were woefully underpaid at that time.
All right, thank you. I'm going to give Rob, I'm going to give you the floor to comment on the pay raise. Now, how would you have voted, and what do you think of Juli Casale voting for the pay raise?
Well, I think if you're doing this job for the money, you're doing it for the wrong reasons. It's meant to be a part-time job. And voting for a 250% pay raise during the middle of a pandemic when people are suffering. And my opponent said, she said we didn't have to vote for it. She didn't want to vote for it. I don't really understand that comment because it was a 3-2 vote. My opponent easily could have voted not in favor of it and not gotten the pay raise and not sent that message to her constituents that I'm getting raised while you're all suffering and you don't have jobs. So I think that just shows that my opponent is sort of disconnected right now from the realities of what her constituents might be facing. In regards to some of the other comments made in regards to pensions, she mentioned a quote from one of our former mayors about a pension crisis. That former mayor is David Schmidt, who's actually endorsing my campaign. And I think it's important to note that during the negotiations with police and fire, they went 9 months past the deadline. 9 months. In that time, our police department lost 17 officers. Now, a handful of those could have just been for normal reasons, but I have on good authority, at least a dozen of them went to other cities or to our sheriff's office because they didn't know how this was going to shake out. Delray has one of the best police departments in the county. They really go above and beyond to engage with the community. They do an excellent job, and they should be paid top 3 in the county and have pensions and packages in that range because of the amount of work they do, because of the amount of training and investment that we put into them. And we lost that many. Now, luckily, our new police chief, Russ Major, has done an excellent job and really focused on recruiting. But there was a while there where crime was on the rise. I'd been told that crime was up by 130%. Part of that's because they didn't have enough officers, and they had officers working basically around the clock. There is problems when we have a commission where several members basically refuse to negotiate with the unions. We have to have relationships with the unions. My opponent always says she doesn't want endorsements, strings are attached, etc. I don't see it that way. Not at all. In fact, we were at the BPOA presentation last night. I said on the record in a letter that I gave to the BPOA, I won't support the new fire station proposal at Anchor Park. And I talked to the fire union about that. I told them, and they said, that's okay. We just want to know we have someone that's accessible to us, that's fair, and that will work with us. That's all these organizations want. And that's why they're supporting me, because they know that I will work with them and be fair. I'm not beholden to them. They don't own me. And they know that we won't agree on everything. In fact, we already don't agree on something, but they're still supporting me because they know that I'm someone that they can work with. And it's vital that we are investing in our public safety in Delray Beach. It's one of the most vital things, municipal services that we provide is public safety and clean water.
All right, thanks, Rob. Juli, I want to ask you about this
May I just
comment.
quickly say,
Hold on.
I don't know why I keep on getting
Juli,
bounced.
if I can ask the question, I just want to pose the
Yeah.
question. Yeah. All right. The question is, please address the comment that I've heard elsewhere in this campaign that you consider endorsements to be some sort of a quid pro quo, or it comes with strings attached. Please address that.
I did say that. I want to apologize because I keep getting bounced in and out. I'm sorry. Thank you for that question. Listen, when I ran the first time, I went to every single endorsement meeting. Some were far away, some were at night. And I sat down and there is a definite, I was told, if we endorse you, this is what we expect in return. And that was not something I could do. And I realized the endorsements didn't have a value to me. I'm not saying, I'm not out seeking them. It's to each his own. He can run his campaign how he likes. But for me personally, I want to be beholden to the residents, and that's what matters to me. To just quickly say, crime was never at 130%. I reached out to the chief to ask him for the statistics, and he is a lovely gentleman, and I think he's doing a great job. But that's not accurate. And just so people understand, we don't negotiate with the union, the staff does. And it took a while because they came in with an extremely high number, and
Juli,
it had to be worked out.
give us I know you may not want to name an interest group specifically, but give us a flavor of what you sort of alluded to there. When a group says in an endorsement meeting, this is what we expect in return, what is it? What is it they expect in return? Oh, we lost Juli again. Okay.
I'm happy to comment on that.
Yeah. Well, you've got. Well, let me just ask Juli really quickly. Juli,
Sure.
The question is, what do these interest groups ask for in return for an endorsement?
I would not feel comfortable saying that on this recording, but if you'd like, I could call you later and have that very clear discussion.
Okay. Well, look, I'm gonna give Rob Long a chance to comment. Rob Long has the support of the police and fire unions in this campaign.
Yeah.
So, Rob, what did they ask for in return for an endorsement?
I wasn't implying that it was the police or fire union.
I
My turn now.
I will stipulate and agree to that. I didn't mean
Thank
to
you.
imply that, Juli.
Yeah.
But I would say this, and correct me if I'm wrong, either one of you. An endorsement that any candidate in almost any municipal election wants to have is the support of the police and firefighters. Go ahead, Rob.
Correct. Ms. Casale, would you mind muting, please, because of the echo?
Oh, sorry. You can.
Thank you. So I went in both these meetings, and all they want from me at the end of the day, both our police and fire unions, want someone they can communicate with that's accessible. At the end of both of those meetings, we both said, we're not going to agree on everything, and that's okay. We just want to be able to have a conversation with you and know that we can work with you as a partner. That's it. Like, as I mentioned, I already told the fire union, I will not be in support of the new consolidated fire rescue ocean rescue station at Anchor Park, which is something that our fire chief is trying to get accomplished at this moment. But that doesn't matter to them. They just want to know that we can work and have a conversation. And I did already have a conversation with the fire union about that specific issue. And my opponent does have an endorsement. She has an endorsement of Mayor Petrolia. She did sit in a screening with me last week. That was the Palm Beach County Democratic Black Caucus, and they endorsed me. So my opponent has attempted to get several endorsements that I know of. But regardless, the idea that an endorsement means that there is necessarily strings attached doesn't make any sense to me, because I think that it means that that's a group who supports your vision that you can work with. I have the endorsement of our state representative, Joe Casale, and our other state representative, another one from another district, Catherine Waldron, because they believe in my abilities. And Joe Casale, I worked with him on a PFAS bill, in fact, I helped him with the language. I actually brought it to his desk. We worked on the language together on a PFAS bill to reduce the firefighting foam used in training that has been linked to cancer in firefighters. So he knows that I'm someone he can collaborate with and work with. And those are the types of relationships that I will leverage to help us get appropriations for Delray Beach that we can use for things like raising our seawalls and other things that came from the Rising Waters Task Force recommendations. We need appropriations to tackle stuff like that. Those relationships are important. I also have the endorsements of Commissioner Mac Bernard and Commissioner Maria Sachs, because again, they know that I'm someone that they can work with, because we've worked together in the past. When I was on the Palm Beach Soil and Water Conservation District, I worked with the county, I worked with the school district, I worked with the Florida Department of Agriculture, I worked with our National Wildlife Refuge. We partnered with all those organizations to build new educational programs for children, to advocate for clean water in different areas, and to conserve over 100 million gallons of water a year in Palm Beach County. So I work with groups. I believe collaboration is key, and endorsements, to me, are representative of those relationships.
All right. Let me just ask Dan and Pat. I've got a different line of questioning I wanted to begin, but I wanted to give you guys an opportunity to jump in. Right. Go ahead, Pat.
Just I would say very quickly, but I'm not sure there will be quick answers on it. And it has to
Okay.
do with Old School Square. And do you believe that, first of all, that the leasing decision was appropriate? And if so, how did it generate financial benefit to the city to cut those ties?
Julie, why don't you go first?
Wait, when you say how did it generate financial benefit, do you mean prior to the termination or?
No, I mean, the decision to terminate, how has that decision benefited the city financially?
Well, look, I wouldn't argue that it really benefited the city financially. That wasn't the purpose of it. But, the problem is this organization was in our building for $1 a year payment of rent. And we were subsidizing them through the CRA, $900,000 a year, most years. And we dropped it down to $750,000. When I got elected, there were financial problems there for years, going back to probably 2014 or 12. And the staff said, upon my election, and then you start to get to know what's going on, the staff said, we have financial problems with them. They're not submitting their documentation required to show where the taxpayer money is going. So now we're in COVID. This is a respected long-term organization. I reach out to the woman running it and I say, you've got financial problems. We've got to get this fixed. I'm getting information that's concerning to me. We have to vote on their contract to give them another annual year's subsidies. And I voted to, with the caveat that they get their finances in order. It was COVID. I was not going to put them out on the street during COVID or stop giving them money during COVID. The woman who was running it seemed like she was doing a great job. But here's what ultimately happened. They didn't provide the financial documents, and another year goes by. Now we're up for reconsideration again. The CRA is saying we're not even giving them any money or consideration of money. They're 2 years behind on their required financial filings to show where the taxpayers' money went. 2 of their auditors disengaged and wrote to the CRA director and said their books could not reconcile. Our auditor, whom we assigned to assist them in coming into compliance, told us that the documents that they provided indicated that they had PPP improprieties. And that is a nice word, because what happened was they were putting different staffing levels on government forms that they were submitting to us than they had on forms to get PPP money and ultimately forgiveness. I reached out to Deborah Dowd. I met with her. I reached out to Scott Porton. We spoke on the phone numerous times. I had lunch with him and Francis Borg. I reached out to and met for tea Ms. Bloom, the woman who donated the money to the organization. I went above and beyond in an effort to try and get them to understand that if they couldn't provide the documents to come into compliance, I was going to have to consider them, not qualified to be our tenant or get any money. Ultimately, they decided that it was better to lose the lease than forego the grant money than give us the documents, because they didn't. They never have to this day. I cannot tell you how our taxpayers' money was spent, and that's a problem. And look, if you go look at the court filings, they will tell you that I met with these people and expressed my concerns over the finances. They will also tell you, at the court filings, that I did give a caveat on the night of the vote. They had 6 months to vacate the premises on the night of the vote. That was their notice. And I said, if they come into compliance within the 6 months, I will reconsider them. I'm a person of my word, and I would have. But what happened the next day? I leave the meeting. I call Scott Porton. I said, I know you're disappointed, but we need to get this resolved. Let's meet next week and let's go for a plan of action to get these finances in order. The next day, I get a letter from the city attorney saying, cut all communication with Old School Square. They just sent a letter of intent to litigate. And then they sent out an email saying they were fully in compliance and they were just thrown out for no reason. It's a disaster, and I'm not happy. We are suing them, countersuing them, for the way that they left the facility, the conditions in which they left it. I believe we will probably recover some money. Their contract had a $10,000 cap, so they're spending probably $100,000, And if they win for some reason, which I don't see how they could, they only stand to get about $10,000. And lastly, I think there's more litigation in their future. And there's also an investigation request was sent to the Office of Inspector General, U.S., for PPP improprieties. So I really felt like my hands were tied.
Rob?
Yeah, so I think my opponent's rewriting history a bit here. So I think it's important to note that in the meeting before, the month before, the lease was terminated. By the way, there was no agenda item on that evening when the lease was terminated. So no one knew it was, everyone was blindsided by that. And the month before that, they were actually, during the commission meeting, were approved for that construction that was being completely funded by a donor. So why would they approve that if it was already on a road to being terminated? If all these conversations, and I believe my opponent that she actually did speak with Francis Bork and Scott Porton and all those people. And I would encourage anyone here on this board to speak with those individuals and ask them how those conversations went with Ms. Casale. But it's important to note that during that year, 2021, Old School Square did not ask the CRA for any money because they were out of compliance with their audit. So there was no burden at all whatsoever to taxpayers from Old School Square that year. It was going to be 100% donor funded. So there was no reason to terminate their lease, especially doing it in a way with no due process, with no public input. And then at the next meeting, by the way, my opponent says she could reconsider in 6 months. You can't rescind a vote 6 months later. You can only do it at the next meeting. That's the rule. And there was an opportunity to do that at the next meeting. 1,100 people, in fact, signed a petition asking the commission to reconsider. Commissioner Boylston brought it up on the dais. Can we at least discuss this? My opponent voted against even discussing it. This is not how you deal with a nonprofit that has been in the city for 30 years. From individuals who have spent decades building up Old School Square, which was the cultural heart of our city. The main issue here is there was no plan on what to do after this. This was done in a way that there was no transparency behind it, no way for the public to comment on it. And then the facility was dark for a year. When my opponent talks about the conditions it was left in, that's because Old School Square simply took all the things out of it that belonged to them. All the artwork, all the sound equipment, everything. And they had just started, they were just ramping up construction when they were blindsided by their lease being terminated. And then all of that money from the donor was pulled out. Now, it's important also to remember that Old School Square was 80% donor funded. That was a whole donor pool that had been built up over years and years and years that we will never get back. There's no way this is not going to be millions of dollars of a burden to taxpayers now, to the city. And even after over a year, we only have one of the buildings really reopened. I know they use the amphitheater once in a while, and they just recently opened up the core now. And who knows how much it's going to cost to actually do the construction project that would have been completed by now on the Crest Theater and then actually reopen that. They blame Old School Square for all of this, but now we're in a position where we had something that was 80% funded by donors that is now a burden to taxpayers.
Okay. Let me pause just for a second here. We're getting close to the end of our time. I've got one more question I want to ask both candidates. I think in this situation, I would like to give each of you also a brief, and I mean brief, chance to make a closing statement. But I have a question about political action committees and about the influence of money in this election and in elections generally. PACs are very active. PACs have been active in Delray Beach politics. They're legal. However, PACs, unlike individuals, PACs, we've seen it at the state level, it's out of control. PACs move money between and among each other in a way that makes it almost untraceable for the average citizen and voter to find out, who actually gave this money. Then you have the corrosive, corrupting influence, in our opinion, of dark money. Dark money is untraceable money generated, raised, and spent by, quote, social welfare organizations that are exempt from the campaign finance laws, basically. My question to both candidates, and I'm going to begin with you, Rob Long, will you make a pledge to not take any money from political action committees in this campaign?
I already have taken a PAC donation. I have one PAC donation for $1,000 from Safer Delray, and that's our fire union. And I'm proud to have that donation. So far, I have no other donations from any PACs, and I won't take any that are from special interests that I do not align with, that my values do not align with. That's the only one that I have, so I can't make that pledge. It would be disingenuous. But that's the only PAC donation that I have. That's my only involvement. My opponent brought up earlier that I received PAC money years ago in regards, she brought up last night at the debate too, as somehow a payment for my advocacy work in regards to PFAS, which is completely inaccurate. My company, Door to Door Strategies, is a door knocking company. We do canvassing work. I've always been transparent about that. We work with a litany of different types of organizations, sometimes on local political campaigns. The one she's referring to back in 2021 was the invoice I have says GOTV on it. I can send that to you. It was simply for canvassing programs that we provided on several local races at the time. It was paid for through a political consultant because we subcontract to political consultants during campaigns sometimes to do their door knocking for them. That's all that was. It had nothing to do with any campaign that I was in or any advocacy that I did as a soil and water conservation district member or anything like that. It was simply payments rendered for services back then.
Okay. Juli Casale, same question to you, please. Yep.
Could you, is it regarding the PACs? I'm sorry, I keep
Yeah, well,
getting-
the question was, would you pledge to not accept any PAC money? And do you agree that PAC money is a problem in city elections?
I think it's a horrible problem. I'm actually going to be speaking on the corrosive impact of money in politics, specifically speaking about PACs and dark money. I did not take it in the last election, and I will not take it in this election. I frown upon it. Thank you. And by the way, I think my opponents, so how the PACs sometimes work, Cornerstone, who is his consultant, has the PAC and will filter the money to the services needed. That's typically how it works. And it works like that in the elections around here. So you won't see the PAC money going directly into his campaign, but what you see is Cornerstone Solutions, the consultant typically will get the PAC money into their PAC.
Rob, is what she's saying accurate?
Yes.
I have no knowledge of that in regards to my campaign. And I could make the same accusation about my opponent and say that she has PAC money hidden somewhere from developers. But I have no way to prove that. I don't know if that's true.
Well,
but I can say that I have no involvement with any PACs except for the one, Safer Delray, that gave me $1,000, which transparently appears on my campaign report, and I've never tried to hide it. In fact, I'm proud of it because it means I have the support of our fire union.
Okay. We've gone well beyond the hour.
sorry.
I would like to give each candidate a 1-minute summation opportunity. Let's go alphabetically. We'll begin with you, Juli. 1 minute.
Thank you so much. Sorry. Thank you for your time. I'll try to be super quick. I've been
Sure.
thrilled to be working as a Delray Beach City Commissioner. I feel like I've accomplished a lot. If you go on my website, there is a page that lists all of my accomplishments, and I'm very proud of them. I would like to continue working for the residents of Delray. I've stood true to my platform of 3 years ago. I am about our quality of life. I am about, being fiscally responsible, and I am about less is more when it comes to development, and I will stay true to that platform. I thank you for your time today, and if there are any additional questions, you can email me, and I can provide documentation with respect to anything that I've said here today.
All right. Thank you for that very much. Rob Long, you have the floor, sir. Go ahead.
Thank you. I do think it's a thing that's important to get across is all 4 candidates right now running in Delray Beach have taken money from developers. That's come up quite a bit. The main difference between my opponent and I is I've been transparent about exactly who has given money to my campaign. My opponent has at least a third of her budget at the time had been made up of funds from Seaside Builders, not the owner or the company itself, but 2 employees, their realtors, their architect, to the tune of about $6,000 that we could trace. So it was sent through a series of pass-throughs. Meanwhile, my opponent at every forum told everyone, I don't take developer money. I'm not taking developer money. And it's just not true. And I have nothing against Seaside Builders or their projects. They do good work for the city. But the other issue is my opponent did just approve one of those projects back in January, a project that had been listed for sale as if they were already entitled to what they're getting approved for months beforehand. And I do think that that's an issue because it lacks transparency. And that's the basis of why I'm running here today, is I think that Delray deserves honest, transparent leadership. And I do have 6 years of experience serving constituents in Palm Beach County and offering exactly that. And I've also spent 6 years serving as a volunteer on Delray Beach advisory boards. I started on the Green Implementation Advancement Board. I went to the Site Plan Review and Appearance Board. Then I served 2 terms on the Planning and Zoning Board. And I've always been clear about my conflicts, and I've always served our city. And I look forward to doing that as a commission.
All right. I wish we had more. I wish we had more
Can I
time.
just say something, Mike, Steve?
Well, I'll tell you what we're going to do, Julie. This has to end somehow.
Okay.
If and
Super
before
quick
we.
though, my disclosures of my donations are all public. Take developer money. I said I don't take PAC money. And there's a big difference between someone giving you money. And by the way, those are all local residents residing here. Gary Iliopoulos is a lovely architect in our city. These are people that live in our city and care about our city.
Oh, I understand. Before we publish anything, if we do publish anything in an editorial that mentions Seaside Builders, we'll talk again. But I want to thank both of you for your questionnaires and thank both of you for your straightforward answers this morning. This has been a very enjoyable and very interesting and productive hour. So thanks so much.
Thank you
very much.
Have a great day.